What if I told you that you could take your website's performance from to awesome in just a few easy steps? We're going to do just that on today's video using my favorite website performance monitoring tool, DebugBear. I'll walk you through step by step, taking a web application from what it is today, figuring out a baseline, identifying bottlenecks, doing experiments in DebugBear before you ever make any changes to your site to see what the impact's going to be, and finally, making those changes and seeing the results. If you want to rank better on Google's search engine, or if you have e-commerce happening on your website, you need to know this information. And stay tuned until the end of the video because I've got a few pro tips that you'll want to know about. So let's get started right away. For this website, it's a simple artist website that has to do with fluid art, and the artist is displaying their artwork as well as information about themselves. And as you can see, it's a very simple single web page with a little bit of text on it, a few things in the footer here for just general policies. We also have a blogs page where you can go in and the artist has shared every time a YouTube video comes out, basically a blog article that coincides with that video release. That's pretty much the site. Now there is a shopping link here, but that shopping cart is not active yet. And this is actually what we're preparing for this website. We want to make sure the website performs as good as it possibly can. And then as we launch WooCommerce on this site, we can keep in mind that that needs to be, we want the most conversions as possible as well. So we're going to take a look at what this website is today and see what we can do to improve it. We're going to be using DebugBear to take a look at what our website is doing today, and we're going to use both synthetic monitoring and real user monitoring to track the performance of our site for desktop users and mobile users. And the first step to doing that, if you're not already a DebugBear subscriber, you should probably start your free trial. You can either sign up with email, you can sign up with Google. So I'm already a subscriber, but I highly recommend that if you need to stop the video and sign up, it's a quick, easy, couple of step process. Go ahead and get signed in and we'll go from there. Once you get into DebugBear, you're going to want to create a project. I've already created multiple projects, but once you actually get into a project, I'll just call mine new. You can come in and start adding a website URL for their synthetic monitoring. So you would just put in HTTPS and your website. I've already put mine in another project, but that's as simple as it is. And then you can choose the defaults to monitor just mobile and desktop for US East, but you can also add additional sites and you can set the frequency as well. I'm going to let you set the way you want to set it, but if you're logging into the DebugBear site, there's plenty of documentation that'll walk you through how to set that up. You can also set up real user monitoring. So the first thing that you'll do is install an analytics snippet. Where do you put this snippet? This is a WordPress website and it uses Divi. So there's a special place that we do that in Divi. In case you are using Divi, let me walk you through doing that. We're on Divi and we're going to go to theme options. We're going to go to integrations, make sure that this header code is enabled, and then you're going to want to put that snippet somewhere in this section. I have Google Tag Manager as well as the DebugBear as well as some other snippets in here as well. That's where you would put it. Once you save those changes, you are good to go. I've already got a project with several of my websites put in here, and this is one of those websites. And I just chose the defaults of looking at the desktop as well as the mobile. And as you can see here, I already know that there's some issues with the website because for the LCP, the largest contentful paint, we're already seeing 3.7 seconds for desktop and 12 seconds for mobile. So we need to kind of address that. Let's take a look at the desktop user and look at the Google Core Web Vitals for this site. So we can see the full time to first byte, the first contentful paint, the largest contentful paint, total blocking time, cumulative layout shift, and page weight. If you're not familiar with the Google Core Web Vitals, there's plenty of documentation on DebugBear's website. I'll also leave a link in the description for you as well. We can see 1.36 seconds for the first full time to first byte, which means this is all taking place almost 2 seconds before you ever even see anything come up on the screen. That's not great. And then slowly we start seeing images load until we get the background image and everything on the page. We can also watch this video recording of an actual synthetic recording of the site. So you can see it does take some time to do this. And this is caused by a combination of things. This site actually used to be a static website, and because it's adding WooCommerce, it's moved over to a real WordPress website where there's actually a server behind it. When it was just a static website, it was just a static content that was served through a CDN. We didn't have to worry about anything happening from a database activity, PHP code firing off, anything like that. It was just basically a static brochure-based website. Now that we're considering adding e-commerce here, we now have to start thinking about every element on the page, how heavy the page is, background processing that would happen, the file types, like the image types. And we can see that we're actually using AVIF format, which is actually a more compressed format. However, it still thinks that the priority is low, and it probably should be higher because this is in the above the fold. This is what the user is actually seeing when they go to the website first. So these first a couple of images up here should be higher priority. And obviously you've seen the site, there's more pictures below. Those can be lazy loaded because they're not seen at first, and they can be loaded as you're beginning to scroll up. So we do have some issues here, and DebugBear has already let us know that it's already seen some things. It's talking about large images that it's found. It's actually found 9 oversized images, even though we've tried to compress them with a plugin on WordPress. And it tells us which files that it sees, it tells us the priority, it tells us the ones that are being lazy loaded, and it tells us how long it's taking. We also see other opportunities to change some things in here, and we will get to all of that. But the first thing I think we have to address is, why is it taking so long for the initial response of the web page to render on the page? If we can fix that, that means the user is going to see something on the page faster. And these days, you basically have 200 milliseconds to let people know and let the eyeball know that your website is alive and kicking. And this is way too long. So we've got to address that first. On the desktop score here for the lab score, we're getting a 61%, and it breaks out for us why that score is the way that it is. If we go back and look at the mobile user for this site, it's even worse. We have a lab score of 33%. And why is that? That's because the mobile experience is actually worse. So any problems that you have with larger images or taking longer to download is just going to be exacerbated whenever you have a mobile device on an even more restricted and dirty network for these images to show up and be seen. So we definitely, as we fix this for the desktop users, it's going to fix it for the mobile users, and we may actually have to make some additional considerations specifically for mobile users who may want to buy some of our digital artwork on this site. So I chose a WordPress website because over 40% of the web runs on WordPress. I chose Divi because it is a little more JavaScript heavy, presents a little bit more challenge than just a straight theme for WordPress. If you use Elementor, that's something that's sort of comparative to this. Many people who are using WordPress websites are using sort of the visual builders instead of just straight WordPress, but you may be different. Any of this is going to help you. Any of these changes that we make are going to be beneficial to you. But if you are on WordPress and you're hosting it somewhere, I'm hosting this on a company called SiteGround, and I'm going to talk about the specifics that SiteGround brings. They have some things that are just a little bit different from, say, Hostinger or somewhere else like that. So let's say you have a static website, right? You built a site in Jekyll or Hugo or Gatsby, or you're even taking a WordPress website and taking a static copy of that and posting it out on like Cloudflare pages and Cloudflare workers. This is still going to benefit you. So let's talk specifically about this connection piece, because that's really important. The time to first byte, that time to where that first paint happens, is very critical. Let's take a look back at the website. This is the WordPress administrator view of the website. We've got a few things that we've already installed as terms of plugins, but we really haven't taken care of when we moved it from sending out a static website to Cloudflare pages, we didn't need caching because this was the development side, and we were only one person was using it to develop, and then we would push that out to Cloudflare pages, and Cloudflare, from a CDN perspective and all the settings that it has, would take care of the performance of the website. And now that we've moved here, it's a little bit different story. Now we're hitting a WordPress server. There's a database that has to execute queries. We have PHP that needs to fire off PHP code. If we look at the status of the site health score, we will see page cache is not detected and the server response time is slow. Well, we know that DebugBear is actually confirming that for us, and it's basically telling us you need to have page caching turned on. There is another type of caching that it's talking about here, a little bit lower. It says persistent object cache makes your site's database more efficient. So there's at least two gains that we can get by adding some type of caching. At this point, it's probably a good idea to explain what the different types of caching are and what they do, as well as for what different providers might have for you in terms of caching that can improve your website. So we're using SiteGround, and there's two places to actually check for caching specifically with SiteGround. So if I take you back to the actual SiteGround, as you log in to control the website from the back end, this is not even in WordPress, this is signed into the SiteGround website. They have a section here on the left called speed. So they have caching and they have CDN settings as well. So their particular CDN is, they have a free CDN, and then they have a premium CDN on SiteGround. Well, it offers a certain amount of caching, HTTP2, Brotli compression, these type of things. We're actually going to use Cloudflare for this. And the reason for that is because Cloudflare is where the DNS servers are actually at. And I'm a big fan of Cloudflare, and Cloudflare has additional settings that include all of this absolutely for free. And there's a Cloudflare plugin for WordPress that you can use to get access to a lot of this. And there's even more on the Cloudflare GUI on those pages on Cloudflare as well. But I want to direct you to something that when you install a WordPress site, specifically on SiteGround, they have something called Nginx Direct Delivery. And this is basically an Nginx server that they have sitting in front of WordPress as part of WordPress, and it is automatically turned on. If you turn this off, it disables their built-in cache. Or there's also this service called Dynamic Cache, and there's also something called Memcached. But these can actually be accessed from WordPress in their plugins. So you'll see here that they have a Speed Optimizer plugin, and within the Speed Optimizer plugin, they have this caching section that I'm going to click on. And within caching, they have these three types here: dynamic caching, which we just saw on the SiteGround page, file-based caching, and then Memcached. That was also mentioned on the page. So we have three different kinds of caching that are just part, and this is a built-in plugin for SiteGround. You can disable it, you can remove it, but I mean, this is pretty common. You'd have to probably get a different plugin to do some of this stuff. Let's talk about the two messages that we got on the site health report. One was about page caching, the other one was about persistent object caching. All right, the first type of caching, page caching, refers to basically bypassing the PHP and the MySQL processing. So why make PHP re-execute if we know that the page isn't going to change that often? And if it's just a matter of pulling down images, style sheets, and client-side JavaScript, like would be on this front page, we should go ahead and cache those up and make that available to anonymous users and make it faster for them to render it down. That also means, because the PHP doesn't have to execute, that the server can serve that faster to the user. The persistent object caching has more to do with the database and MySQL having consistent queries that happen a lot, but it's the same query and it's the same information that's produced and it's not changed. That type of thing can save the database a lot of overhead and also keep the server processing down as well, and that's what you want. Anything you can do to keep the server, the individual server, from having to work so hard for each individual user that comes to your site, that's the better thing to do, obviously. So we've got those two types of caching. And from a SiteGround perspective, we just saw that we have the dynamic caching that it's called. That's actually that first type. That is the page caching of those static assets. The second type was the mem cache. That is actually going to satisfy the second requirement of site health for the persistent object caching. Remember, we also had file-based caching in there as well. This is where it tells your browser, if you've already downloaded a page and you have those static assets in your browser, look at your browser first instead of having to go to the cache that's out on the server as well, because the fastest requests are the ones that you never have to actually make. So if you don't have to go out to the web to even anywhere to the edge or anywhere and get that that object that's not going to change, if it's still sitting right there in your browser cache, pull it from the browser cache first. So we're actually going to turn on all three of those to satisfy all of the caching requirements and see if that improves the site before we take the next step. Okay, we're back in WordPress and we're on the Speed Optimizer plugin page, the settings for these cache settings. You may have a different plugin that your host provides, and you may not have any plugins. So you may have to go on the web and search for the different types of caching. There's plenty of plugins out there that will do this type of caching, but we're going to go ahead and turn on dynamic caching to satisfy the first requirement, and we see we have success there. We're also going to turn on file-based caching, and we see success there. Now, I know that turning on memcache, it's recommended we actually need to do the setting inside of SiteGround first. So let's do that. Let's go to memcache and let's enable it here. Now we've got it enabled for this site. Now we should be able to turn it on here. And we have success. If you try to do that before you turn it on and enable it in SiteGround, you may get an error on this page. So now we go back to our site health screen, and what do you know? All of our recommendations for performance are now gone because we've satisfied the requirements and it says this is actually good. So we should see some type of improvement. Let's actually look at a few details that DebugBear shows us that in addition to these initial core web vitals, I actually clicked on Lighthouse, and let's look at how much blocking time that we have. Let's actually look at the different audits that Lighthouse is showing us for performance. We're getting a 61. That's where we're getting that score from. It's telling us that we have that 3.7 second LCP score. We also see more information and more diagnostics, more suggestions that it's talking about. DebugBear is sharing some of this, but we can also see additional information on this report. And we can see that there are other things that we need to look at other than just performance. We also have accessibility, best practices. Of course, we're getting a great SEO score, but that's not going to be the thing that helps us the most. If our performance is bad, it's still going to affect our SEO in a negative way. So we definitely need to pay attention to this. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the left-hand panel, we're going to scroll down, and we're going to click the button that says Test Page Now. So now it's actually going to manually force running a test on this same site. And now it says, wait a few minutes, and we'll see what happens. Okay, it says test has finished. Let's click to reload. So now we look at the new score that we've gotten, and it's 73. Actually, that's not the greatest score in the world, but it's actually better than 61. It actually tells us kind of where we've actually improved. You'll notice there's a lot fewer white squares here until we actually start seeing information. And that's because our full time to first byte has been reduced from a little over a second to the 400 millisecond range. And the amount of time has been reduced for the first contentful paint, where we actually see something painting on the screen, to under 1 second. And that was about 2 seconds before. So we have shaved off that much time just from these changes. However, we still have to deal with the fact that this is not giving us a good score because of our largest contentful paint. That has actually, it's still a problem here. So we still have to deal with the fact that we have images that are taking too long and aren't priority. So I still have one more caching trick up my sleeve that I actually want to prove out, and we're going to look at that next. This next thing has to do with adding a CDN. Now, you may have a preferred CDN that you like to use. It might be Akamai, it might be Bunny, it might be some other CDN that's provided by your web host. I like Cloudflare. And so if you want to add Cloudflare as your CDN, number one, you'll have to sign up with a Cloudflare account. Once you do, this is completely free. All you got to do is just have the account, be able to sign in. Then you can go into WordPress and you can add a plugin. So we are going to add a plugin for Cloudflare. You go into the main store and just type in Cloudflare. and you will see Cloudflare. It's not the first one on the page for whatever reason, but you see Cloudflare. I actually have it active. You can install it and make it active from here. Very, very easy. Make sure that it's by Cloudflare. Remember me talking about all the other types of caching that you have available, like Lightspeed Cache, which is also a pretty cool one, but we're going to go with Cloudflare at this point. Once you have that activated and installed, you're going to go to Settings and Cloudflare. And what you're going to have to do is put in your account information. Once you sign in through this plugin, it'll be the same login, and you'll have what's called a global API key. You'll get that from your account settings, and you'll put that in here. This will connect to Cloudflare through an API. And then you'll be able to make settings in here that will be equivalent to if you were on Cloudflare's page and you were making those changes there. Now, there are additional settings that you can look at within Cloudflare itself that do not apply here, but the main ones actually do. So let's take a look at these settings here. What I'm going to do is just apply the recommended Cloudflare settings for WordPress, because Cloudflare is pretty smart. They kind of know what to do when it's working with a WordPress site, what it needs. And then anytime that you feel like maybe you're working on your website and you want to purge the cache that's in Cloudflare to make sure that you're getting the fresh page, you're going to want to purge it here. But remember that SiteGround also has aggressive caching now turned on. We've got at least 3 layers of caching happening here. So you're going to have to go to probably SiteGround and clear some of that out, as well as possibly even your browser cache as well. So there's a lot of caching going on here. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is go into the setting page. There is actually an option here that Cloudflare has called Always Online. So if something happens to your website, let's say that you were making some changes, developing something, and you get that white screen of death that everybody hates from WordPress, where it's clicking an execution and that's all you see is there's a problem here. Maybe you put something in code snippets and it just ruins your site. You can make sure that your site can always be accessed while you're trying to fix that by having this selection turned on. And also development mode. This is one of those settings in Cloudflare that you would have to go to Cloudflare's UI and make this setting if you wanted to completely stop using their cache temporarily, just to make sure that you're using non-cached information while you're developing your website. You can just turn that on. Let's just recap here what we've done. We've not only turned on caching for the server itself, to make sure that your browser is checking its own internal browser cache before it goes to the server, but now we've also added a CDN. Why did we create that separate layer? Well, the CDN is actually going to have copies of your website all over the world in what they call edge servers. And these edge servers are the closest to wherever your location is at. So if you're in Japan accessing the site, there's going to be a server in Japan. If you're in Atlanta, Georgia, there's going to be a server somewhere near Atlanta, Georgia, or some major city. Now that's important because we have physics to deal with, right? So how long does it take every packet of data to go around the world to Japan from Japan versus coming from Atlanta, Georgia? It's this much of a difference in terms of our concept of time, but in a server's concept of time, it's long. So anything that you can do to shorten those trips, and especially if it's something that's cached, now we're caching those static assets, copies of that all over the world in all of these different servers that Cloudflare has available to you. So you have all these copies to make sure that the quickest trip is made to get that resource. So if you have these layers of cache set up properly, then A, your web server is not going to work as hard. B, your pages are going to be served much quicker. And 3, all of this adds up to better core web vitals. And that means better search ranking and more conversions. So there's a few more Cloudflare setting changes that I want to make on the Cloudflare UI. Let's go there now and make those changes, and then we'll retest. So the first thing I'm going to do is log into Cloudflare. If you don't have an account, you should create one and connect up, and make sure that your DNS servers for your website are pointing to Cloudflare. I'm logged in and selected the website that we're looking at, and now we're going to go to speed. So let's take a look at the recommendations page first to see what's enabled and what it recommends that you enable. What is SpeedBrain? SpeedBrain can speed up your load page time by using what's called the Speculation Rules API. And I don't want to get too much into detail about this API. You can look that up, but it instructs browsers to make a guess at which request would be the best to make to speed up where you're going to go next as to what page you're looking at now. So as you're navigating through your site, it actually makes it faster. And we are going to turn that on. Now we have HTTP2 turned on. We also want to make sure that HTTP3 is turned on. That is referred to as quick. This can actually really help performance as compared to just regular TCP/IP, and especially when you're doing TLS or authentication, it actually speeds up that whole process as well. If you have this zero RTT connection resumption turned on, somebody who's been to your site before, has previously connected, we're going to turn that on because that will actually help return users. And we're also going to look at this early hints. This will cache and send 103 early hints responses with the link headers from your HTML pages. This allows browsers to preload linked assets before they see a 200 OK response or other final response from the origin 403, 503 HTTP status responses. We're going to turn on early hints as well. We are not going to turn on Rocket Loader because this is, although it's supposed to improve the paint time for pages that have JavaScript on them, this requires pretty detailed testing of your website. It has broken some things in some websites before. I've seen that happen. So unless I'm ready to start testing out all the functionality, I'm probably going to leave that turned off. We're going to go to the caching section and we're going to look at the configuration. One of the things that you're going to want to do is change the browser caching time to live to something greater than the 4-hour standard. I would recommend 16 hours or more, maybe even a day, but I'm going to set it to 16 hours. I think that's a good starting point, but I could probably set it to more because our front page is not going to change that much. So we made those changes on Cloudflare's website. Let's retest the site and see if our score changes at all. As you can see, our score actually went down by 1 point, which is not that big of a deal, but let's take a look at why it did that. Our full time to first byte went from 415 to 414. That's good. Our first contentful paint went from 1.08 to 900 milliseconds. That's good. Our largest contentful paint, 2.76, 2.78, so a little bit higher. Our page weight is actually a little more, from 3.63 meg to 3.70. Cumulative layout shift is pretty much unchanged. And then total blocking time went from 211 to 234. And that's the main reason for the score difference here. But those are going to be changing because of other experiments that we're going to run in the next section. We'll actually fix those and we'll see if we can get that score up. But the thing I'm really happy about is that between all the caching changes that we made, we actually were able to bring this down by more than 50%. So we're already winning and we haven't made a single change to any of the code or anything to our website. We've just made configuration settings. So that's win number 1. Now let's actually address the next thing on our list, which is we've got to deal with these images, and we've got all of the above the fold images we need to be taking a look at. And this main one that's the background image here, we need to look at that, and we need to look at these first images that are in the purview when you first load up the page. The really cool thing about DebugBear is that you can come in here and run experiments. You can actually look at some of the things that it said that you can try out to optimize your site without actually changing anything to your site. So you can see the impact before you ever actually make the change. So one of the first things that we want to do is deal with the images. And one of the things we noticed in our reporting was that we had an image that needed to have a higher priority in order for it to be seen. So if we just click add here, so what it's doing is taking this largest image that it's found that needs to be high priority, and it's making that change to it. So we're going to just do that and run an experiment to see if we were to make that change on our site, how would it affect our page. So let's do that now. So the experiment is done running, and what do you know? We actually have a much higher score. Now we're getting into a really good range for our score. We now have an 87%. Our blocking time is less. Our largest contentful paint, we're getting good on that as well. Let's take a look at what really changed here. We have less blocking time from 225 to 200. Now, our first contentful paint has not dramatically changed, but our largest contentful paint has actually changed from 2.74 seconds to 1.21 seconds, and that's a big change. So now we're actually getting to something on the screen where we can actually use that page faster. So we've moved from back here to up here. Now, it doesn't mean that we're done yet. We still have some things that we have to do. However, it just means that if we prioritize the images, we haven't even reduced the sizes of these images yet. Which images load first actually makes a big difference in the score and the website performance. So if I wanted to actually make this change on my website, how would I do that? Okay, there's a couple of different ways. You could actually do this through some kind of code snippets, through some kind of function. You can actually manipulate the HTML itself in the WordPress website. Since we're on Divi, I've got actually an easier way to do that. So let's just copy this code and let's go to the Divi part of my website. We're going to go to Divi and theme options. We're going to go to the integrations in the same place where I put that DebugBear code. I'm actually going to paste in that code that edits that part of the page, and we're going to save changes. And now that we've done that, let's come back over to DebugBear and let's go back to our page for the desktop and let's test the page one more time. Our test is complete, and now our score is 84%. That actually reflects the change that we made with Divi. It made it very, very easy. So now what we're going to need to do is continue through this process and address these other images. So another thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove this Watch Me Create section because we no longer need that. We have videos that show up on every single blog page, so I don't need this anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. I'm going to go ahead and go through this and apply the recommendations that DebugBear says that I should, and then we're going to retest and we'll come back and see what changed in the score. All right, so when you've scaled those images, you're going to have to come to the page that actually has the images on them, and you're going to have to, in Divi, this is the way that you do it, you're going to have to reinsert that page or that image. And so I find the image, and you'll see here at the bottom that it's set to full size is 279. That's what we reset the images to on as far as size. We can save that page, and it will have the new size on there. And if you were to actually come out of here, let's exit the visual builder, and then you right click and inspect that image and hover over it, you'll see that the size is now 279. So now we can retest the page and see if the image sizes that it was recommending to be smaller are smaller. So now we have refreshed the page after changing those image sizes, and we're now getting a 94% on our score, which is awesome. We still have about a 400 and some odd millisecond time for our first time to first byte, but we're able to get the site completely loaded and everything within a couple of seconds. Takes a total of 2.8 seconds, which is still not great in my opinion. As a performance engineer, I'd like to have more. But again, we only changed a couple of things. We made sure that our image sizes were a lot less. We made sure that we put a priority on the largest contentful paint item. We put a lazy load on these, and we made the proper caching settings. So we've got a much better experience now, much better checkboxes here from DebugBear. So DebugBear is showing that we're in a lot better shape than we were. And if we go back to all of our sites and we look at the desktop version, we're now seeing a 1.1 second time for LCP. If we look at the mobile version, we're now at 1.8. So if we look at the mobile score, we're now at 86%, and we were a lot worse than before. So that just goes to show you that with a little bit of time, running a few experiments in DebugBear, and going through some of the settings that you have available to you in some free plugins, free settings. Maybe you don't use Cloudflare, maybe you use a plugin for certain things that we set for Cloudflare, but either way, these things are available to you, and we didn't really fundamentally change much about our site. Now, I mentioned that I was going to talk about a couple of pro tips here. One of the things that if you look closely at this website, you're going to see that we have a shopping cart that we're preparing for. And that's going to become very important in the near future. But notice it up here at the top, we have this 0 items up here. I've put WooCommerce as a plugin. That's a very popular e-commerce shopping carts plugin for WordPress. And as of right now, I mean, the shopping cart isn't even live, but I've got this sitting up here because the plugin is actually loading certain items in this page, and we don't even have a shopping cart. A pro tip would be to replace this with icons that just look like there's a shopping cart there, but not load a default shopping cart until somebody's actually on the shopping cart page and ready to put something into the shopping cart. And this is something that's really important for anybody doing e-commerce, is that Shopify and many of the other either whether it's a plugin or whether it's a SaaS application, you'll find that they use a default shopping cart, which means they already preload it whether anybody's going to buy or not. And there's a small percentage of people that browse your site that are even going to buy something for you. So it doesn't make sense to preload resources from that server if people aren't actually accessing them. So the secret sauce is on a home page or a front page, before anybody actually clicks on that shopping cart, don't preload plug-in components or those pieces. Maybe you make it look like there is because you have the same icons there or you have a hyperlink there. But once people start putting items in their cart, then you can actually start loading all those resources you need for the shopping cart to work. And on those pages, because people usually have a login and a session going where you're tracking it, that's where you want to back off of the caching for things that are going to be highly dynamic on the site. And those things need to be fast as well, but that's a different kind of tuning than we're talking about here. The other pro tip that I'll mention is if you are using Cloudflare, there's another component available. It is a paid for component, but it's $5 a month. It's not an unreasonable amount. Let me show you that real quick. This service from Cloudflare is called Automatic Platform Optimization, specifically for WordPress. We kind of skipped over that in the settings that we saw earlier. And it gives you overall 72% for first time to byte, in other words, better performance, and 23% better performance on average for the first contentful paint. So I'm sure that if I applied this to our site, I'd actually get that much more of a gain, and I would be right at like 100% score once I begin to add this up. This better user experience obviously leads to better SEO. It's easy to set up. It's just flicking a switch, basically. And it does work with both static and dynamic content. In other words, it's smart enough to recognize when somebody's on a shopping cart, what doesn't need to be cached for that logged in session and what actually does. So it's a pretty cool little thing that you can add. But the main thing that's important here that I want to mention is you're not chasing after a score. You are chasing after good performance. You're chasing after a great user experience. And if your score is 85% and your users are happy and they're buying your stuff, that's what matters. You don't necessarily have to have 100%. But having a better score obviously means that you're implementing better and better practices. And when you do that, you do get better performance, which leads to better user experience and more conversions. And that's really important when we're talking about commerce. And if this website is actually paying your bills, it's paying for your company to run, you actually want to be better than any competitor. Many companies get caught up in the back-end technical capabilities that they have to produce a good website, but they don't necessarily think about the end user experience. That's the ultimate goal, is to make a good end user experience, especially when you're selling something. And if you want to get ahead of your competitors, you want a better user experience, because when the cost of switching from one service to another for a user is basically free, it's just pointing your browser to a new website, the competition is extremely tough. So you have to have some kind of competitive advantage, and if that's a great frictionless user experience, that can put you ahead of the curve. And so we've talked most of this time about the fact that this synthetic monitoring, these synthetic tests that we're running are giving you these scores, but let's also not forget about the other component that DebugBear offers, which is RUM data. So as users are actually using your site, you'll actually see what they're experiencing. So just off the top of my head, I don't know exactly when this was done, but these are actual sessions where people were getting certain times depending on where they came from. And this particular website right here, this is scottmoore.consulting, there was a 23.31 second time that they got. Well, where are they coming from? What type of browser were they using? What type of connection? Was it a mobile user? What, I mean, those are the type of things where, you know, all of that matters here, and we'd want to analyze which ones are good and which ones are bad. You need both synthetic user and real user monitoring analytics. And I think you should focus on both of those. If you start with the synthetic, get the low hanging fruit out of the way, you're always going to be wanting to tune it and make it better and better. That real user monitoring will give you more insight into what's going on. Most of the time, whenever you see those very large times from countries that are way far away from where your hosting provider is, this is where a CDN really pays for itself. So making sure that we have a CDN with a copy of our static assets nearest to this person would probably have made a big difference between it being 25 seconds and 5 seconds or 3 seconds, whatever that might have been. So those are the kind of things that you should keep in mind. DebugBear is extremely helpful to help you determine all this. And as you've seen, it's very easy to use, it's very easy to retest, and you can do these experiments without even actually changing your site to see what kind of impact it's going to have on, if it's going to be worth making the change or not. In my case, it was worth making all these changes. We'll continue to alter this website to make it as good as it can possibly be. And as we open up that shopping cart, we want that really good shopping cart experience for end users. I'm sure you would want the same thing too. So if this has interested you, it would be great if you could check out DebugBear at debugbear.com, sign up, tell them Scott Moore sent you, and tell me about your experience with DebugBear. How has it helped you make your website performance the best that it can be? Until next time, this is Scott Moore. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.